Well, without any further ado, look at flight. Oh, that just went black. Why did that go black? There we go. Today we're looking at flight, and flight is about an out-of-control plane that is crash-landed by an out-of-control airline pilot, Whip Whittaker. Let's have a look at that. Is that going to play?
You might have to tell it.
Good morning, Captain Whittaker.
It's a manifest, but I have just so long.
Let's get them tucked in. We're ready to push.
How you feeling, man? Look like you put some kind of mood up there, man. You saved a lot of lives.
Everybody in wait positions.
The way you landed that plane was nothing short of a miracle.
Listen to me. Trim us nose down.
The plane fell apart at 30,000 feet.
We're gonna roll it. Roll it. Ready? Here we go.
I'm on the list, baby girl. There's all kinds of crazy news people out here. You're a rock star, man. You will never pay for another drink as long as you live.
Captain Whittaker is a real American hero.
This is you, Lion, an attorney from Chicago. Why do we need a lawyer? You don't remember having your blood drawn in that crash? You had alcohol in your system. That could be life in prison.
The evidence begins in 10 days.
I have the microscope right now. You gonna shoot me? Can I come inside?
Yeah, come on inside. I'll shoot you inside.
This is an act of God. Those guys would do that.
Our investigators concluded the aircraft failed.
The FAA licensed pilots and simulators recreated the events. Every pilot killed everybody on board. You're the only one who could do it.
You saved my mom. I want to talk about the days leading up to the accident.
This thing is so heavy it's killed me.
I drank the night before the flight.
Does Whittaker know he's going to jail?
My client's not going to jail.
It's a lie. It's the lie.
I'm trying to save your life.
No one could have landed that plane like I did.
Exciting stuff. Well, the movie itself opens with a scene at an Atlanta hotel. A man and a woman lie in a bed. There's bottles of alcohol and various other substances strewn all over. The alarm calls, and groggily they get up. And the man turns over and grabs a bottle and sort of drinks the dregs, the hair of the dog. A woman smokes a joint and then hands it to the man. But it comes time that they need to get going. And so the man leans over and takes a line of cocaine. And all of a sudden the world shifts into focus. The music that was dull before gets louder and comes into focus. And our man walks out confident in his airport, his pilot blues. And so we're introduced to Whip Whittaker, played by Denzel Washington. Whip is a contradiction. He's a highly functional alcoholic. Now, Whip seems in control. He seems charming. He seems capable. But as we go on, we will see that exterior slowly chipped away until we see the darkness underneath. And as you saw some glimpses, the first flight that we see Whip take doesn't end well. Just as about to make their descent, they hear a loud bang, and they begin to fall out of the sky. Nothing works. Everyone goes to pieces. The co-pilot screams, but Whip is cool. Whip is calm. And he decides to roll the plane to stop the dive. It's apparently something you can do. Whip gets the plane down in a field, losing only 2 crew and 4 passengers of the 102 souls that were tucked away ready to go. Whip is an American hero. The way you landed that plane is nothing short of a miracle, says the union rep Charlie Anderson. You'll never have to pay for another drink as long as you live in this town, says friend and enabling drug dealer Harling Mays. But the investigation into the crash begins, and Whip's state while he was flying comes into question. Now, Whip rejects any question that it was something to do with his state. He says, no one could have landed that plane like I did. That plane fell apart at 30,000 feet. And as the investigation continues, Whip also meets Nicole, who is herself a recovering drug addict. And they start a relationship which is initially destructive as they pull each other down into the spiral. But eventually, Nicole gets help and tries to help Whip as well. She says, I'm worried about you. And Whip says, well, I'm fine, thanks. Nicole says, no, you're not. You're really not. You need help. Whip. You go to a couple of AA meetings and all of a sudden you think you're Jesus Christ. I choose to drink. Nicole says, do you? You choose it. I don't see a lot of choice going on. But Whip lives his lies. Even as his lawyer and his union rep are trying to save him, to keep him from jail, to keep him from himself, Whip keeps trying to control his life, which is getting increasingly ever more out of control. He loses his lover. His family want nothing to do with him. His own son kicks him out the door. But all Whip needs to do is to stay sober. Stay sober until the hearing. Answer the questions he needs to, and he's home free. You see, the investigators have found a problem with the plane that meant that it crashed. In every simulator that every pilot has tried to try and recreate what Whip has done, they fail. Whip is the hero. But the investigators also discover empty vodka bottles. Whip has to shift the blame from himself and the dead air hostess, that very one that he spent the night with, is an easy target. All he needs to do is shift that blame and he's home free. He just needs to keep control. But he gets to the hearing and he just can't make himself blame that air hostess. He hits the limit of his lies. He gives up, breathing out, God help me. Reflecting later, he says, and maybe I'm a sucker, because if I told one more lie, I could have walked away with all that mess. Kept my wings, kept my false sense of pride, but more importantly, I could have avoided being locked up with all you nice folks the last 13 months. But at least I'm sober. I thank God for that. I'm grateful for that. And this is going to sound real stupid for someone locked up in prison, but for the first time in my life, I'm free. Whip has a new chance at life. The final scene sees Whip sitting down with his estranged son. He's come to interview Whip for his college paper on the most important man, or the most interesting person I've never met. And so he asks his father, so, who are you? And as if for the first time, Whip thinks, that's a good question. Whip is now free to discover who he is. It's a great story. It starts with that exciting ride down from 30,000 feet as that plane crashes. And it continues on with this constant question, will Whip get away with it? Will he get away with hiding his drinking? Will he keep his wings? Should he get away with it? The action at that start really serves as a metaphor for what's going on in Whip's life. During the plane crash, over and over again, you see the pilots shoot back and forth to each other. I've got no control. I've got some control on my side, my plane. Nothing, no control. I've got control. It's the last thing that Whip says as he moves that plane into the upside down position. You see, Whip does have some control of his plane and he's able to roll the plane and stop the descent. But he still slams that plane into the field. His actions, while saving many, still harms a number of people. It looks like control, but it's not really control. And in life, it's similar for Whip. You see, he's damaged. He has very little control over what's going on in life. He's hurting people. He says it's his choice, but as Nicole says, it's not much choice. Not much choice is going on. Whip's control is a lie. Whip is not able to control his life, but he thinks he can. This is all revealed when we meet a cancer patient halfway through the movie. And he kind of reveals a bit about what we think about life, how we think about how we control life. And he says, you spend your life believing that you have all the control over what happens. Bull. The plane you're flying goes down, out of your control. God gives you cancer. I have no control over that. You can't control whether your plane goes down. You can't control whether you get cancer or not. That's all in God's hands. And the point is made time and again in a more positive light. Whip's landing of the plane is a miracle. 10 pilots in a simulator couldn't land that plane. Everyone crashed and killed everyone on board. Whip's landing of the plane is nothing short of a miracle. It was an act of God outside of Whip's control. The uncomfortable truth that becomes revealed in the movie is expressed by the religious and therefore crazy wife of the co-pilot. God landed that plane. And as an interesting aside, when they first hear that the co-pilot's wife says God landed that plane, the union rep says, yeah, I believe that God landed that plane. Just like I believe God should go and have a turkey sausage over in the buffet. Go on, Whip, go and get one. You see, the whole God in control versus Whip as God in control is just throughout the whole movie. But Whip can't control his life. He can't control his drinking. But he thinks he can. He's convinced by his own lies. He thinks he's in control. He doesn't want to have to change. And so when he comes to the end of his lies, and he humbles himself and gets rid of his pride. He admits his drinking. He finds freedom in prison. This whole idea of being in control is at the center of what Flight is all about. The idea that we have control in our life is revealed again and again to be a delusion. And it's the tyranny of that delusion, that idea that we're in control, that keeps us from being free. And so Whip's problem is his reliance on drugs and drinking. And he lies to everyone, even himself, believing that he's in control. But the problem for Whip is that he's partly right. He's partly right because as he's flying that plane, he seems to be able to get it down and saves most people. But it all comes undone. And the thing about flying high is that the higher you fly, the more spectacular the crash. Whip's freedom comes when he confesses his darkness, his alcoholism. He faces up to the reality of his problems. He even literally calls out to God, God, help me. Whip's story is a story of redemption. And it's something that's telegraphed right from the start of the movie. If you've seen it, who has seen it, by the way? Excellent. the whole room. Good stuff. You would have noticed maybe this. I'm not sure if you can see that, the time on the clock there. The number 7:14. Strange time to have to wake up for a 9 o'clock flight. But 7:14 is actually an allusion to 2 Chronicles 7:14, or so IMDb.com tells me, which says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land." You see, this verse mirrors the journey of redemption that Whip must go through. Whip's freedom comes from humbling himself, giving up on his pride, and calling out for God's help and turning from his wicked ways. There's 2 points I want to think about in reflecting on this movie. The first is the story of redemption. It's really fascinating that in our movies, the stories of redemption come over and again. Whip's life is self-destructive. He's convinced that he is in control. It's not until the end where he gets to the end of himself, the end of his lies, that he learns that freedom only comes by giving up on our attempts at control, by recognizing reality, by seeking help from outside of ourselves, even from God. But the second point is this illusion of darkness. And one of the problems with movies is we watch movies because we want to see these lives that are so much bigger than ours. You know, the people whose lives have the higher highs. You know, no one could have landed that plane. And the lows, the lower lows. At one point, Whip says, in his anger, "What?" Fill in the gap. Life. There's this disconnect. We see this life so obviously falling to pieces, disintegrating before our eyes. We see Whip completely oblivious to the fact he can't help himself. But we often fail to see that this movie is putting up a mirror to our own lives. It's trying to show us something. It's no accident that we're put into Whip's shoes through the journey of the movie. Whip's redemption is a sign for us. It's a signpost of a warning and a message of hope. You see, most of us are quite oblivious to our failings. We may be aware of some bad habits. We might concede that we might be negatively impacting other people. But most of us have blind spots. And most of our darker characteristics, we like to keep them hidden from even ourselves. It's a bit like how most of us think that we're good drivers. There was a recent American survey that said 64% of us think that we're above average drivers. Just think about that. This is despite the fact that most of us, 89% from that same survey, will admit to occasionally exceeding the speed limit. We have our blind spots. And if we're honest, they're probably going to be more serious than occasionally speeding. And like Whip, we don't often want to face up to those shortcomings, particularly the darker areas, the areas that if other people were to know what we were really like, they'd realize that we need redemption just as much as Whip does. Well, what does Jesus have to say to all this? What does he have to say about how we live our lives and how we are blind to our darknesses? Well, in John's Gospel it says this: "Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God." Just as Whip doesn't want to give up his drinking, choosing instead to live his lies. I choose to drink. We also perversely revel in our darkness. Our secret darkness makes us feel good. We don't really want to live in the light. Oh, we can confirm that living in the light is right and it's true and it's good, but we actually prefer that secret darkness. And we fear coming into the light because we fear being exposed. But you see there in sentence 21, where it says, if you're going to live in the light, it doesn't come about from a decision that we make. If you live in the light, it is actually a work of God. If you're going to live in the light, what is exposed is not the darkness that you fear coming out, but is actually the work of God in bringing you out of that darkness and into light. And so it's appropriate that when Whip gets to the end of his lies, that he breathes out that, God help me. It's no coincidence that he breathes out that, God help me. Just as it's no accident that in the 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous, it involves admitting our failure to control ourselves, and it involves submitting to God to remove our defects and to bring us out. And in following this path, despite his prison, Whip is free. Sentence 19 says that light has come into the world. And this light is no mystery. It's just a little bit earlier on in that same passage where it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. We all have our blind spots to our darkness. And we all have the capacity to be destructive in our darkness. We all prefer our darkness to the light. And the only way to live in the light is by the work of God in sending his Son so that we can live in the light. And so as we reflect on flight, it's time to consider, am I living in the light? Do I have a hidden darkness? Is it time to stop living the lies and to let God change me?